Welcome, Sukjeen, to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm okay. I'm okay, surprisingly. A little tired, but that's how it usually is for me in the morning.
Yeah, it's how we roll, right? Like we're
Yeah.
here to survive another day. We made it, so that's good enough.
Yeah, I'm just glad I've shown up and I haven't had a misfit with like pain or something, or I can't focus on something. There's usually something that's going on, but I'm okay today.
That's great. We love to hear that, and actually ties in so nicely to the first question. And
Mm.
I really need to think about another way to word this because I've been saying the same thing for however many episodes now. But I love to ask every single guest, how do you refer to your disability?
I feel like I've had like a really weird journey with disability because like for a really long time I wasn't even aware of like disability movement or disability rights, let alone the fact that I was actually living with ADHD and autism, like from a child. Um, so it's been weird to know that I've acquired chronic pain for the last 5 years and been saying to everyone, "Oh, I've got an acquired disability," and then going, "Actually, I'm just late diagnosed." And I've been like trying to manage barriers and that kind of thing my whole life, but I've never really like recognized it as that.
Uh-huh.
Um, so to put it short and sweet, I don't know how I refer to it. I just go disabled, neurodivergent.
But I also think that's a really important thing to say because I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how they refer to their disability because like you said when you get like a late diagnosis, you've had so much of
Mm,
your life where you're like this is a part of who I am, and then you get a diagnosis and you're like, "Oh my goodness, so many of these traits that I just thought were me were actually just how my brain's wired." And
yeah,
it takes a bit of time to be like, okay, like how do I now relate to this, because this is a big part of who I am, but I've never
right.
known about that part, which it is complicated in a way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was actually really funny because I was having this reflection last night, um, on how like disability rights, disability movement, everything to do with disability is like so separated from everything else.
Yeah.
And that the only thing that I could think of was like if you separate yourself from being disabled, you're less likely to actually advocate for yourself. You're less likely to um, do any kind of self-care. And I don't mean self-care as in like face masks and baths and going to a spa. Like it could be that. But in the typical sense, self-care is just looking out for you first before looking out for everyone else. And that is disability rights to a T. Um, and I find it so weird that for so I'm gonna go on a rant here. Like
Honestly, this
the
is what
fact,
this podcast is for. I love it when people rant because I'm like, yes, come on.
but yeah, no, and it's interesting to see the differences with those that have accepted disability, even if it isn't like accepted it um in terms of like, oh, it's a better part of me, but just knowing about that disability, knowing it's there, actually changes your outlook and your perspective on just the world, the
Mm.
experiences. I feel like the last 5 years of having like chronic pain and going into like advocating for myself a bit better, putting my needs first has been life changing for me. It's actually been more beneficial than it has been negative. And
Yeah.
it's find it so funny when, non-disabled people come to you and like, oh, well, you're just differently abled. You're not disabled. You don't need to call yourself disabled. You don't need another identity. You don't need another diagnosis. I'm like, it's me. I'm figuring out me. Like
Yeah.
that's the best part. But even just generally non-disabled people, they don't get that.
Yeah.
Um, Random reflection.
No, but I also think it's a really important one because I think what you said about those who are able to accept their disability in whatever way, shape, or form, it is self care because you do become better at advocating for yourself. You become better at putting your needs first. You're more able to see where you need to put your rights, your needs, your wants first. And you're
Mm,
also able to see where society doesn't do that for you.
yes.
And that's when you're like, okay, this needs to change, or I'm going to speak up about this, whether you want to or not. Like, speaking up is very much your choice. I'm someone who just happens to really enjoy talking about disability all the time, so that's what I do. Like, but you don't have to do that. But I think that's such an important thing that you said, because actually I've never really thought about it like that. But being able to be like, yeah, I'm disabled, it also means that actually, yeah, I'm also able to stand in my power and tell you what I need when I need it and what my access
Yeah.
needs are, without me flinching about it, because it's an inherent part of who I am.
Yeah, and you understand what those needs are to be able to ask for them. Because I know for so long, like being like late diagnosed as well, I was trying to figure out those things of what I need, what I could
Yeah.
ask for, but without actually knowing what it was that I was struggling with. And
Mm-hmm.
that's half the issue. Is like if I had known that, then I would have been able to go, Mom, I can't process what you're saying to me right now. It doesn't make any sense. Just give me 2 seconds, and
Yeah.
I'll be able to respond. Do you know? It's simple thing. Even like with teachers, school environment, friends, everyone, it would have been completely different. And yeah, I think the biggest part of that reflection was that specifically like for South Asian women, we're taught from a young age to not look after yourselves. Like it's everyone else first and
Yeah.
then you. And I think that's why we've become so much further behind in this. And yeah, it's upsetting to see. But I'm just glad that I've got this reflection that I can then go, oh, by the way, I'm going to share this here and there and I'm going to talk
Yeah.
about it because it needs to be said. It needs to be said that so many other disabled people that maybe they don't even know they're disabled or they don't claim that identity. That it, I mean, that's completely up to them. It's optional, but it is disability rights for you to take care of yourself first, um, and to know how to actually ask for those accommodations.
Yeah, absolutely to a T. But I really like what you said just then about how you having an earlier diagnosis would have completely changed school. Because I always love to think about what childhood was like, particularly for disabled children. Because I think
Mm,
there's such a massive shift as a disabled child, being a disabled child, then being a disabled teen, then being a disabled adult. There's very like three very key and separate stages. But
mm,
because you had a late diagnosis, I wonder what the whole scholastic system was like for you, because I can imagine, and this is completely off assumption and through conversations that I've had, is that
yeah.
might not have been your favorite thing.
Oh my gosh, no, it was terrible. Um, I love reflecting on it, but you know, when people come to me and be like, "Oh man, I wish I could go back to like so and so age because it was so much easier," then I was like, "Nah, it's easier now because I
Yeah.
know me now." But
Mm.
you know, going back to 12-year-old me, oh my God, no. I maybe with this mindset, with this reflection and
Yeah.
knowing who I am now at 12, it would have been 10 times better. But going back to those specific shoes, no, she was struggling a lot. She struggled because she didn't understand why it was when she wanted to say something in response to a question in class. She knew the answer, she's got it in her head. She wouldn't be able to actually get it out of like
Yeah.
verbalize it at all. It
Yeah.
was stuck. It was literally stuck. Um, or even when I'm in a group setting with like other I would say friends, but they never really treated me as such. You know, in those environments, I was having the same thing, and it's like I don't understand why I can't say it right now. But then I go home, I'm in my room, have my little bit of a time, and then with my family, I'm completely fine. I'm
Yeah.
talking. If anything, I can't shut up. Talking a bit too much, and I didn't understand that. But I was also the only person that could see those two sides in
Yeah.
school, social environments. I was struggling, and then when I was at home, I was able to say so much, and if anything, I couldn't stop myself from saying things.
Yeah.
Um, so that made it 10 times harder. But alongside that, so I grew up and I still live in a very predominantly white area, um, which made things harder because I was the only I might have been just the only brown girl. I can't really remember school days. I suck
Yeah.
it. But it was very limited on who you could talk to and
Mhm.
relate to in that sense. Um, and then I was racially abused from other peers, from teachers actually even as well. They were just a little bit more subtle about it. I learned how to be able to keep myself quiet in those situations,
Yeah.
and basically escape it through that. But I didn't realize that the reason why so many, and it wasn't the only reason, but the biggest reason why people were doing that was because they knew something was off. um,
Yeah.
they knew something socially that I struggled with, and they didn't know how to discriminate specifically about that because they couldn't figure that out. So they discriminated against my skin color instead, or even my religion as well.
Mm.
Because that was easier to do. So I went through most of school life going, I
Mm.
wish I had a lighter skin color. And I know that was most of it anyway. Um, but to only have that thought on just my skin color, I didn't think, oh, okay, maybe I act a little differently. Maybe
Yeah.
I think differently to other people and I behave differently to other people. It just never occurred to me. It never occurred to my parents. And it's nobody's fault. But it was a struggle. It was a struggle.
Yeah. Because there's a big phrase and I can't quite remember, so I'm going to bastardize it, but it's something like if you keep telling someone there's something to a certain
Mm,
degree, they're going to believe it. And that, and from what you've just said, that kind of sounds very apt because, you're, like you said, you've been racially abused. So,
mm,
and it's not, it's because that was the easy thing to go for, whereas actually it was something else. But because that was the first thing and that was the first point of call, and almost nobody dug deeper, which sounds
mm.
like a really fucked up way of putting this together, and I feel like I'm really messing this up, but because there wasn't that like deeper level of knowledge, and that's all you're hearing as well, of course that's going to be what the first thing that you believe. And I just
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that as well, because I know that that's not easy to talk about, and I really appreciate you talking about this because it actually leads on really nicely to what you do now. But
Mm,
that experience like just doesn't sound like an ideal situation for anybody to grow and thrive in, and it makes me sad that you went through that. But equally, would you be here now doing what you do now if you hadn't? It's like swings and roundabouts. Do you know what I mean?
oh yeah, absolutely. I think about that so much. Um, and just generally like not even the work that I do, but just like how my personality is shaped because of that.
Yeah.
Because I probably wouldn't have been so obsessed with social justice at 16 if it
Yeah.
wasn't for the fact that like I had gone through stuff like that. And it's funny as well because you kind of see some similarities in between how um racial abuse is used against you and how literally ableism is used against you as
Yeah.
well. Like for example, like there's so much discourse and like comments and things around masking for like autistic people or even ADHD as well. And there's so many different terms for it, like camouflaging and so on. The first time I ever came across that was actually at 16 when I was Googling and researching about intersectional feminism, and
Mhm.
I came across code switching, um, which is actually the exact same thing, but it's more, I guess, towards ethnic minority groups switching to camouflage, basically masking their environment that suits better. Like if you're in a white majority setting,
Mm.
you know that you have to almost mask parts of your identity. You don't talk about your faith, you don't talk about
Yeah.
culture, you don't talk about the family and the food that you're going to have tonight because that's probably going to put you in a dangerous situation if you don't know them.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing makes it almost easier to pinpoint what it is that how you behave in certain ways because I've always known masking as code switching, which
Yeah.
is just always something that I've done. um, but yeah, and I've always contributed to the racial abuse that I had. Um, but yeah, so I did to an extent I did figure out quite a lot of the ways that I behaved quite early on, but I never contributed it to being autistic. I never contributed it to having ADHD. That was never something that occurred to me until recently.
I honestly, I do love the conversation about women and ADHD and autism because I find it fascinating for like a whole
Mm,
host of reasons. So I used to work, and I still do work with autism predominantly. That's like what I do outside this. But I used to work with
mm,
autistic children, and the amount of young girls that I worked with compared to the amount of young boys that I worked with was staggering. There was maybe like 4 girls to every, I'm gonna say at least 15 boys. And
yeah.
when you think about that number,
Mm,
it's such a misrepresentation because so many women go so underdiagnosed for so long, or they might even go their entire lives without a diagnosis, when actually it's just because autism and ADHD present incredibly differently in
oh yeah.
like women and men. And I find that fascinating because it's along the lines of, I recently found this out. This is completely off topic, but all medical studies that were done up until I think something along the lines of like the 1970s were all
Right.
done predominantly on men because
Yeah.
they didn't trust women because of their menstrual cycle, because they couldn't chart where they were. So because they had a menstrual cycle, they would be up and like obviously we all know we're up and down across a month, whereas
Yeah.
guys are up and down during a day. So they could figure out for men exactly where they were every day at 9 a.m. They were going to be exactly the same. But for women at 9 a.m., they're not the same throughout their menstrual
Yeah.
cycle. So that's why medical studies have predominantly been done on guys because they were seen as quote unquote more emotionally stable.
Mm.
Isn't that fascinating? Like my whole brain was like,
Oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense because even I was when I first started taking ADHD medication as well, I was starting to notice like about a week, maybe less before I start my period,
huh,
the meds don't work. They don't work at all. Like
it's not
it's
happening.
almost that my hormones have just I don't know, depleted completely.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not giving any advice to anyone listening right now because I don't know. I need to do my own research on this, but I definitely know that that is something that's happened. And when saying it to my consultant, he was saying that they were going into new research around this because of the fact medication also doesn't work the same. So it makes sense when you say it because actually they've only done these studies. Um, I think it's since 2018, right, on women.
Yeah.
Or maybe even earlier than that. It could be
2018.
2019. But either way, it's still acceptable in comparison to what did you say, 1970?
Something like the 1970s
Yeah.
when they first started introducing women. And then,
Wow.
but this was like, I'm talking like one woman per study. So, like, out of 100 people, it'd be 99 men and one woman. So, that's why, like, our medical knowledge, particularly for women, particularly around female health, because when you think about female health in general, like, the knowledge that we have
Mm,
about it is absolutely
awful.
disastrous.
Yeah. It's
I,
so bad.
it's like, it's such a head fuck. I was trying not to say that word, but it's the best word that I've got for it. Like no other words coming to mind.
No, it is. It is. I recently found this is completely away from disability. But I recently heard that they never used test dummies, female test dummies in cars before. So they're doing that for the first time this year. And that just shows as well, like just being a non-disabled woman, you're in a lot of danger just getting in a car. Imagine being a disabled woman getting in a car.
Yeah,
That's my only mode of transport, and that scared me so much.
yeah. But it's so true. And like that I love what you said, like imagine being a non-disabled woman getting into a car, but then imagine being a disabled woman getting into a car because our bodies are way different.
So much different, so much different. And I think that's the scary part is that it's been normalized as like, oh, well, women aren't needing to drive places um as much. And it's like we're in 2023, so a lot has changed. And that means every process leading into that needs to change with it as well. And the fact that that's happening now in this year, it's just
Yeah.
scary.
I would absolutely love it if we could talk a bit about Chronically Brown
Yes.
because I remember coming across this and being like, this is the first organization, social media, anything I have seen particularly targeted to what you do. And
Mm,
I think you're right. And when you say that there's so much that we don't know, but also it's so fascinating because how has this not been done before? And I think I say that a lot about disability, and I think maybe that's because I'm a really gobby person, and I find, a bit like you, probably social justice, like I can't compute why certain things
Yeah.
are the way they are when they don't work.
Yeah.
But I would love it if you could like talk about it, and about what it is, what it does, how it started, all of the good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's always been an assumption for disabled people that if nobody speaks up about it, then it's not needed. But for us, we can't always verbalize the things that we need as well, or it's kind of harder to do so. Um, and I was starting to notice that on a different scale for South Asians, and that was like shortly after like chronic pain started for me. And I was trying to explain to like certain members of my family as well how like what that meant for me, um and how like it's not something that can be cured. It's not like as easy as taking some paracetamol and it's like all better now. Or I had one comment that was said that, oh, it's just growing pains, and I looked at them and I was like, I'm 21. I think I've done all the growing, and I know I'm 5'3", but well actually I'm 5'2" and like 3/4, and every part of your height counts when you're short.
I'm 5'3" as well, so I'm like, I'm 5'3" in a bit, on a good day.
Right? So I know I'm pretty short, but at the same time, like it didn't make any sense to say that, oh, it's growing pains. So trying to get that across to them, I was really, really angry. And I think it was right at the beginning or just before the pandemic had like properly started, I guess. I decided to make social media accounts. I named them like a random name, which happened to be Chronically Brown. And I just started sharing what that experience is actually like so that my family members could follow it, know what it is, that like in my day-to-day life, like some days I just can't move at all, or some days I have to take this medication. It's not a bad medication. It's just been stigmatized against.
Yeah.
That those kinds of things. But then I was also having like other South Asians come to me, and they're from usually from private accounts that didn't really share anything about their conditions or their disabilities, or impairments in that way. But they were sharing like basically their life story because they hadn't had anyone else to talk to about this stuff that they
Yeah.
could relate to, or they didn't feel safe enough to. So like from that, I decided like, I would ask them, can I share your story for you? It
Yeah.
doesn't need to have your name. It doesn't need to have like any way associated to you. You completely write it up, and I'll share it on your behalf. Or I would speak for them and I'll start sharing their story like it's almost like it's mine. But just so that they're able to see themselves in what's being shared, they
Mhm.
can feel less isolated from it, and hopefully empower them to do the same as well. Um, because it's a little difficult for us because I come across lots of people that are in domestic abuse situations because of the fact that they are disabled, so they can't speak out about it.
Mhm.
Um, but on the other end as well, it's just like it's family members that are going, you don't need to talk about this because what will the neighbors say, or what will our friends down the road say, or what will they say at that wedding that we'll go to next week? They're consistently worried about the judgment from others, that they hide something that they don't know how to talk about. Um, or I guess can't see it from a positive light. They see it from this very stereotypical, that means you can't get married, you can't cook, you can't clean, you can't get a job. You'll always be reliant on us as parents, but we need you to be looking after us when we're old. So you're
Yeah.
just going to pretend that you don't have a disability.
Mhm.
Um, those are the realities. And I felt I was very in a privileged position that I know I won't experience any of those things. I was getting some backlash from what I was showing, but I wasn't getting major backlash that
Yeah.
anyone would stop me. So I just kept going with it. And since then, it's just kind of snowballed into something that we just will host monthly discussion groups, or we'll go to like specific exhibitions and we'll share our translation resources. or we increased engagement on certain, like usually health related research.
Yeah.
um but it's all to the betterment of helping South Asians to own disabilities and also
Mm.
just speak out about them. And if the work specific services that we offer don't offer anything to them, we know that in the back of our heads, us being there is just as beneficial for them
Yeah.
because they don't see themselves as much. Um, and yeah, the only reason I say that is because, user led, it's really hard sometimes. It's really
Yeah.
hard being disabled and then also talking out and trying to help as much as you can too, which I'm sure you you already know. Like it's difficult sometimes, but I love it. I love
Yeah.
it.
I think what you're doing is so important because I was having a conversation with a friend who's also quite big in the disability space, and she's doing some
Mm,
incredible stuff. And what we were talking about is how actually, particularly women, I mean, particularly women, but also actually when I think about it, also men as well. And that's not to like stereotype gender wise, but when we're talking about, the disability rights movement, it is very white.
mm,
It's very, very rare that in a roundtable talk about disability, everybody is represented. And I mean, that's all genders, all races, all types of sexuality, whoever you are. It's very, very rare that it's a diverse panel, which is so upsetting because
mm,
disability is the only thing that doesn't discriminate.
yeah,
Like, it doesn't matter who you are, at any point in time you can become disabled, like regardless of who you are. It literally does not matter. There is no magic
yeah.
pill that you can take to stop you becoming disabled, whatever your disability may be. And I love what you do because you're really shining a light on that. And I like the fact that you're so unapologetic about it as well. You're like, actually, sorry, like, you're not brown, so you can't come in. Like, because there's so many other barriers that other people face where the roles are reversed, that actually why take up the space. It's there, we're meant to all have a seat at the table, and if there isn't a seat at the table, like, get on it and dance on the table instead.
Exactly right. And I think like you're so right. And I've been saying this so much to people. It's like disability doesn't discriminate. If it hasn't affected you right now, it might affect you in a month. It might affect you in a few years down the line. You don't know. It could be a loved one. It could be you specifically.
Mm.
Um, and that's why it's so important to, accept those disabilities. Like I said, like earlier with the self-care and things, like you'll have that, but also you'll be able to understand it on a deeper level. We've, going back to neurodivergency and like ADHD and autism, we've recently found out how that looks different for women.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say that that might look different for South Asians? It
Yeah.
might look different for Black communities, and we don't really know that because we haven't had enough conversations for us to look into ourselves to then go, oh, it's culturally different. There's like a really big genetic component here. Um, or even just like the way that we behave with it when we're not even aware.
Yeah.
Um, like and this is personal reflections, and I definitely am not gonna start like a scientific study or anything. But like I've definitely seen that there's quite a few people in who are neurodivergent and they're not aware, and it's almost led to them being and developing like certain behaviors, usually like with narcissism,
Mm-hmm.
that has then gone generationally down because that's the only way that they've shown their children how to behave. Um, and it's so upsetting to see that on a higher scale just because we are brown, but just because we haven't had that conversation around neurodiversity to the point we don't know how to behave or deal with it, work with it, we work against it. And then as a result, we pass it on to further generation. And it's I don't know, it's really hard to see stuff like that happen and have nobody talk about it because we're not even aware for us to talk about it. And it's going to be an ongoing thing. Like we're always going to be figuring things out, like how that will be different culturally, how that'll be different for different faiths, genders, sexuality. Everything's going to be like an ongoing learning for us. But at the forefront, we need to start talking about intersectionality
Mhm.
because of the fact that everyone can be affected by disability
Yeah.
and how different that is going to be from person to person. If we don't speak about that part, we're never going to get anywhere to help people further down the line. Um, but again, that's just my personal reflection on it. It's just when you're thrown into work like this, I say thrown in very um, nicely because I actually love it so much that I could never be thrown into it. I put myself into it. When you're consistently thinking about it like this, you really do reflect on it differently. Um, but I love having these conversations about it. I love the fact that through the last few years we've started to see a bit more of a conversation around it.
Yeah.
Because it gives me hope for stuff like this. It really does. Um, yeah, just in comparison from when I first heard about the disability movement to now, it's definitely changed for the better.
Yeah.
Um, there's some down things that are currently going on, but between us as a community, I feel like there's more of a together and community sense instead of this separated. You talk about race and you talk about disability, and that's separate from each other. It's quite nice to see that.
Yeah. And I love that actually it is becoming that, because I think you're right. I think actually generally on the whole the disabled community tend to be the most inclusive, and I think that that's
Mm,
because outside life can be so exclusive. So like everybody understand what it's like to go up against access barriers. Everybody understands what ableism is. Like we all have our own stories. We all have our own experiences. And there's a lot of commonality between us. But that's
mm,
regardless of what your disability is. So it doesn't
yes.
doesn't matter that I don't have a hand and that you have ADHD and autism. Like we will still
Mhm.
understand when I'm like, someone was a dick to me today, and it was because of my disability. It wasn't because of like, you know, something else. That it was the disability was the common denominator here. And I think actually, like, yes, it's awful to go through that, but equally it is quite nice to be able to have a community of people where you're like, this really rubbish thing happened, and they're like, we understand, we have your back. And
Yeah.
that's the one thing I love about the disabled community, is that we do really try and rally around each other regardless of what the problem is.
Oh
And
yeah.
also, like, we tend to have the funniest sense of humors. That's just a fact.
I feel like I have a very controversial opinion when I start saying to people like disability humor is unmatched. There is
Agreed.
nothing like disability humor.
Agreed.
Because and I think it's so much better when non-disabled people get offended by it because it's not for them anyway. So it makes it
Yes.
so much better for them.
Yes, and I actually love what you said. Like, it's not for the non-disabled. It is
Yeah.
not for them, and that's why you find it awkward, and that's why you feel uncomfortable. It's just not for you. I'm sorry, you're not.
Yeah.
You're not in the gang.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to stop with our ridiculous humor because you're offended by it, because actually that's our truth and we're allowed to laugh about it too. Like, why can't we? It's hard.
Yeah, literally, I love. Oh my God, I love that so much. Like, it's not for the non. But it's so true. Like, it's not for the
Yeah.
non-disabled. Like, and also don't put yourself to try and find it funny when you don't. Like,
Mm, right. And I find again, this is where there's, common things align as well. Like people, non-disabled people tend to center themselves in disability a bit too much. Um, when they start using things like differently abled or get offended by disability humor as well. But then the same thing happens as well with like race when you start talking about those experiences or even just making fun out of it. There's usually some white cis heterosexual man in the middle of it centering themselves and offended by everything that's been said,
yeah,
and you just think to yourself like, why can't we just be able to talk about it without having that backlash? Why can't you just sit and listen, please?
yeah,
Just sit and listen. And that's the common between all of them, really. If you don't have that experience, sit down and listen. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's not about you. We're not talking specifically and hating on you as a person. We just want you to listen, do better, and help us. That's it. It's simple.
I love that. And also, I think I'd add to that, like, you don't have to tell us that you feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
you feel uncomfortable, do something about it. Don't just sit
That's
there.
your problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Literally that's your problem. Like, it's not my fault that I've made you feel uncomfortable about my lived experience.
Yes. Yeah.
I like, I love that though. Like, this is not for you. You just need to listen. Oh
Yeah.
my God. It's like, it's so powerful when you say it, isn't it? Because you're like,
Yeah.
there's so many things that, like, you're right, that it's common between every ism, as they say.
Yeah.
You just need to sit and listen, because if
Mm.
you're offended or you feel uncomfortable, then you know that at some level, and I hate to break it to you, if you do feel a bit uncomfortable, you could be part of the problem. Shock horror.
Exactly. Exactly. If you don't sit in the uncomfortableness, then yeah, you absolutely are the problem. Going back to disabled humor, you just reminded me of a joke that I randomly said to a family member when I say, um, about racism, sexism, anything. I was like, the only ism I don't mean is autism. And I said it, and then I realized I was talking to a non-disabled person, and then went, "Oh no, it's not gonna work as well as I meant
You
it
didn't
to."
quite understand why that's so funny.
But it just kind of came out like verbal diarrhea, and I was just like, "Oh, that's the wrong person to say that to." And now I had to share it with you because I need some. I'm so sorry.
There have been so many times where I've said something about not having one hand, and I've been like, "Oh, you weren't the right person to say that to."
Yeah.
No, I like wish I could take it back. And the thing is, once it's out of your mouth, you can't just swallow it back. You can't be like, "Oh," it
Yeah.
doesn't work out, and you're like, you just sat there and you're like, I
Awkward
feel
silence.
awkward because you feel awkward. It's not because
Yeah.
it's not funny. I found myself hilarious, but the fact that you're squirming with it kind of makes me squirm a bit. But I was still
Yeah.
funny. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, because it makes you feel uncomfortable too that you said something like you start almost gaslighting yourself into thinking you've done something wrong, um, only because of their reaction, which is such a sad thing as well, because it kind of sends you into a spiral when you have feelings like that. And really, you need more of a connective community feel where you could just say what you want, like in a non-hateful sense. There's no hate
yeah,
going on, but you're allowed to just joke if you want to joke about it, because yeah.
yeah. You do you, babes.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in a comfortable environment, why can't we?
Yeah. I would love to ask you a piece of advice that you would
Hmm.
give a younger version of yourself.
I see, there's so much that I would want to say to my younger self, but
Yeah.
not like advice wise. It would be more of a, don't worry, you're gonna figure it out soon, so don't stress so much. I think advice wise, I would I would say just stick to your gut, listen to the gut, learn how to listen to your gut, um, and then make sure that you do what your gut says as well. Because I was consistently in situations where I went, nope, gut feeling, stop, because I can't deal with it. It's overwhelming with everything else going on. I think it would have saved me in so many situations if I just listened to my gut
Yeah.
a lot more. Um, but that's part of the process I'm doing now. If I had advice, I would have done that so much younger.
Yeah. I love that listen to your gut, because I think a lot of people
Mm,
could really take that on board. Like, they say that your gut's your second brain, don't they? Your gut knows before,
yes.
like your gut picks up on everything way before like your brain does. The amount of times I've been in a situation and my stomach has like dropped and I'm like, okay, I'm not meant to be here. Bye. Like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have those. It's almost like you're start thinking you're somehow like psychic or something or magic, but it's it is just genuinely that your body knows what's about to happen.
yeah,
And it's trying to save you for that moment. But I've had those feelings, and then at the same time, the feelings that I've listened to are the ones that are absolutely ridiculous. Like I would get anxious answering an email, and then I'll just avoid it for like so long as well. And I'll listen to those feelings, but I won't listen to my gut that's going, maybe there's a reason why this specific email it just
Yeah.
sounds a little off about. Um, and if I had known that, I would have been able to respond to it, but I just, ran away instead. Um, which is why I wish I listened to my gut a lot more from a younger age, that I could learn these things now, but now I'm just working through it at 24.
Yeah, we love that. We love that. We
Yeah,
gotta just, the thing is, I think sometimes you don't know what you don't know until
yeah,
someone either shows you or you figure it out for yourself. And like actually, it's great. Hindsight is a wonderful, wonderful thing, right?
oh
Like
yeah.
we all love reflection, we all love looking back at childhood or whatever, but sometimes you can go a little bit too deep into it.
Mm,
And also on the flip side, if you didn't have those experiences in earlier life or, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, however long ago it was, would you be the person that you are now doing the stuff that you're doing? And I think
yeah,
I think about this quite a lot. I'm like, had I been, I don't know, non-disabled, would I be as gobby as I am now? Probably not. But that's because I've always wanted to shout and scream about what I think is right and wrong. Do I
yeah.
have an inherent sense of justice because I'm disabled? Probably. Like I probably do, but have I been able to cultivate that and become a bit more eloquent with how I say it? Absolutely. And that's developed over time. So
Mm,
I would definitely, like, I would praise my younger self and be like, well done you, but actually like wait for your time as well, because you have to go through
yeah,
experiences to almost like marinate in them to become who you need to be, which is
oh yeah.
incredibly wordy. And I'm actually quite proud of how that came together because that was quite eloquent.
Yeah, I was gonna say you put that perfectly, actually, like way better than I could put it. That is, yeah. I think about it a lot, and I don't think I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't change those
Yeah.
experiences just so that I could, I don't know, have a easier childhood. Um, because the person who I am now, because of all those experiences, is probably going to be so much better than the girl that would have come out from that non-abusive school environment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. I those experiences definitely shaped me.
Yeah. So I like to ask everybody, is there a particular positive trait that you have noticed within yourself through any form of hardship? Have you, upon reflection, looked back and been like, actually, I'm really proud that I was. So, for example, someone was like, I'm really proud that I've stayed soft when the world can be really hard outside. Or some people say that they're really proud that they're determined. And I always wonder, like, and particularly because we're disabled people and it becomes a bit harder to notice positive reflections, is there a particular positive trait that you're really proud of?
This might be controversial, but I think my resilience.
Yeah.
Um, I don't like that I have resilience in every situation, and I have to have that in every situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I've enjoyed the fact that no matter how much has been thrown at me, and I've had to, take so much support and tools and things to be able to overcome them in a different way. Well, not overcome, work with them. That I've almost been able to do that in a situation where I don't have to think about it now.
Yeah.
It doesn't come like a as a massive shock. It's like, okay, how do we deal with this? Deal with it, feel the emotions, and move on to the next thing, because it's not, it hasn't had such of a bigger impact on my life that I'm like stressing and only thinking about that one thing that's happened to me now. It's almost like, oh, what's happened? I can't do anything about it. I can feel those emotions of how I feel because it was so negative towards me, or like it was not great. Um, Work with it, and then use that for something that's actually either really beneficial or just move past it completely. So
Yeah.
like chronically brown was one of those things that I worked with it instead, because I couldn't keep I couldn't keep having those situations for me, and then for so many other South Asian people were
Mm-hmm.
dealing with the same thing. I just, yeah, I think my resilience has been the most positive thing, because I've been able to help other people as well as myself as well at the same time.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I particularly enjoy what you said actually about sometimes you don't enjoy the fact that you're so resilient. And I think that I can completely relate to that, because I think sometimes I would love to be able to just sit and cry over
Yes.
certain, and just really, and like, sounds really weird, but like enjoy the fact that I'm crying about a sad situation, when actually I think probably a bit like you, throughout your life you've been like, okay, yeah, that's sad, I feel sad, but I need to just, okay, cool, like process it, move on. And
Yeah.
and you're right, it does become a bit second nature, because you're a bit like, okay, cool, no, next thing. Okay, cool, we've been, okay, that's another thing, cool, like let's keep going, like this is menial compared to what we went through last week.
Mm,
But I like that you said that, because I think there's a lot to be said in sitting sometimes in emotion. I think we're obsessed with instant gratification as a society. We love
yeah.
things to be immediate. We love to get things yesterday rather than today. And actually sometimes you do need to sit and process emotions, and it can take a bit longer. And I think that's probably like been my downfall in life, is where I've probably like moved on too quickly to something else. And I'm like, oh, that still really annoyed me, but that was like 6 months ago. Why is that popped up now? You're like, it's because you moved on too quick.
Yeah, you haven't worked through it enough. And that is the downfall of resilience is you've become the strong friend.
Yeah,
You've you've
yeah.
become that everyone can rely on you because they know that you can deal with either your own situations or their situations so well, that when something happens to you and other people are aware, they don't think, oh, okay, let me take a step back. They might be struggling with X, Y, and Z now because this has happened to them. They just automatically go in, oh well, she was fine next last time, so she'll be fine again this time. So there is downfalls to it. I absolutely acknowledge them because it's not the best thing to be resilient. It's not the best thing to be forced to be resilient to the
Mm-hmm.
point you don't know how to not be resilient.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, it is a really good skill to have too. So I've
Mhm.
yeah, it's been one of those.
Yeah, it definitely is a double-edged sword. And I think that,
Mm,
just gonna put it out there, therapy is the best thing ever. If you have
yeah,
access to it, go to it. Like,
yeah.
therapy will change your life.
Yeah, no, it definitely was one thing that I changed my life as well. It was you can figure out all these things out loud, in an environment that you don't necessarily have to think twice about because it is safe and you know it's safe.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing for me. Like I never had spaces where I could just say whatever I want and be safe in it. Now I'm just meh, I'll say whatever now because I've had that space for me to be like I don't have to worry too much about what I'm saying in every sense. And the reason why I say that is because like I've like growing up as I had to think about every single word that comes out of my mouth
Mhm.
because it could be that little thing that then irritates the next person because you've said it wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's the autism. But yeah, I'm trying to work with that instead now, which is that's why it's beneficial. But again, that goes back to the self-care thing as well.
Yeah.
Now that I know that, I know I can work through those things in therapy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I actually only have one final question.
go on.
And that's my favorite question out of all of them. Sukhjeen, are you disabled and proud?
I am disabled and proud. Very proud. Oh,
Yay! I
that felt weird to say. That felt nice to say.
but I love that, because more people need to hear that, and more people need to know that it's okay to be proud of being disabled. And that's not to say that it's easy, because Jesus Christ, we all know that it's not.
Oh yeah.
Some days are much better than others. But you can have pride in your disability, and it's okay. Like, being proud of your disability is actually really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an up and down journey for everyone. There'll
Yeah.
be times where you're less proud. Well, not less proud, just less accepting because there's barriers in your way, but I wouldn't change this identity because of that. Like I
Yeah.
love the fact that I get to be part of this community. I'm getting all teary. Why am I getting teary? This
Oh,
is in
don't
my
you cry, because I cry when people cry.
this is in my like trying to unmask and you'll see every emotion going now. um but it's not that I'm trying to escape a disabled identity in any way. It's just because I know it's harder for the moment.
Yeah.
And it's harder for me in some instances, in certain spaces, in certain settings. It's harder for me to be brown. It's harder for me to be 24 because I'm taking this seriously. It's
Yeah.
there's always going to be something. You know, it's harder for me to wear um my reading glasses when I need noise cancelling headphones. You know, there is things that makes it super irritating, but again, I wouldn't change it because yeah, my my humor from it alone is the best.
Yeah. I want to say a massive thank you for coming on the podcast today. I have loved this chat. I think everything we've spoken about has been so important, from intersectionality to being proud of being disabled to misdiagnosis, undiagnosis, like how women are seen in the disabled space. I've really enjoyed this chat and I'm really thankful that you came on, and thanks for giving up some time for your day to come on and just chat with me about stuff. I've loved it.
Thank you so much for having me. I've actually really enjoyed it too. So thank you for like listening to me ramble and rant.
Oh, thank you.